Hello. Today I'd like to share some thoughts on vulnerability. As human beings, we make ourselves vulnerable all the time by sharing our thoughts and our feelings, our adventures, our traumas, and all of our life experiences with others. Not realize it, but allowing ourselves to be vulnerable is a valuable practice that helps us stay balanced and centered in our lives, much like managing our monkey mind, as well as not minding what happens and forgiving others. They all help us on our journey along the way. So, what does allowing ourselves to be vulnerable mean as a practice? Because it is a practice. Is it important? And how do we do it? Well, let's start with the dictionary definition of vulnerability. Vulnerability says that it is a state of being where we are exposed to some emotional or physical harm or attack. Now, that's not necessarily what I'm talking about here, but that's what I think most people think about when they think about vulnerability, is that emotional or physical attack. And yet, sometimes it's not even that kind. Sometimes it's just not that way. In 2015, Brene Brown wrote a whole book on vulnerability called Daring Greatly: How the Courage to be Vulnerable Transformed the Way We Live, Love, Parent, and Lead. She also did a TED Talk called The Power of Vulnerability. And I have a whole chapter in my book, How to Be the Real You, on vulnerability because it's that important. And Brene Brown, her quote that I love so much about vulnerability is this: vulnerability is about showing up and being seen. And it's tough to do when we're terrified, if we're afraid of what other people will see or think. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. What Brene and I are referring to here about vulnerability has more to do with our mental state, our emotional reactions, and our possible defensiveness in the face of some verbal or emotional attack. And sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's just telling us that we're wrong or that what we feel or think is not right. And so we want to defend ourselves and try to get somebody to come along or think about our way. But that's not it. That's defending ourselves, and that doesn't help us. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the other side. So basically, being vulnerable means we allow ourselves to be who we are without fear of criticism or judgment. Now, I know that's not the easiest thing in the world. I know it's scary, but I do know the truth is we can get there because I've done it. And as I always say, it just takes practice. Practice, practice, practice. I think about vulnerability as a strength. Now, the Buddha knew it a long time ago. The Buddha said vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. And it's a strength because it gives us the ability to grow and to learn and to change. And those are all good things, all good inner work that helps us be less defensive and therefore very strong. So, how do we do this? Well, it's a practice. We do this one step at a time. We begin by observing our patterns and our behavior. When do we want to defend ourselves? What has someone said to us that makes me want to say, oh no, that's not, I this and I that, or when we're being pretentious or acting affected, oh, the work of being vulnerable is to catch ourselves when those old patterns of behavior come in, when we find ourselves wanting to defend ourselves. Now we have to remind ourselves we're in the process of changing up and not let that old monkey mind come in and say, oh, you can't do that. If you fall down, you pick yourself up. And the monkey mind tamed. So as I constantly say, it just takes practice. You stand up and start and you do it again. And something apropos that I want to add here that I think is so important. And I heard it so long ago and I still love it and I still laugh because it's so, so true. And we realize what it means. And this is sometimes you're the pigeon and sometimes you're the statue. And that's where vulnerability comes in because we understand sometimes you're the pigeon, sometimes you're the statue. And it makes me laugh all the time. I love the concept. I love the theme. I think, oh, yeah, this is the way it is. And there's two others. There's one, sometimes you're the dog and sometimes you're the hydrant. And then there's one, too, sometimes you're the bug, Sometimes you're the windshield, but the concept's the same. Sometimes life comes at you one way or another, but it's all good themes for something that's really a part of every day, accepting and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and to know that this is where it is. So I'll finish here. Being vulnerable is absolutely courageous and powerful. It truly is. Allowing ourselves to be vulnerable is an act of the greatest courage. Why? Because we're being real. And that's the most important thing in our world today is being real. Not hiding behind a facade or trying to appease others or protecting ourselves, defending ourselves. We're wearing our hearts on our sleeve, which allows us more healing than we can even yet imagine. It is a powerful, powerful experience and brings our growth to a whole new level. You wouldn't think vulnerability would, but it's true. Being vulnerable is a deep form of subtle power. And you know what? It's backwards. It's backwards because in order to become more resilient and strong and more formidable, you have to allow your mistakes and your weaknesses and your flaws to come out in the world. Let the world see them. In doing so, that stops others from having any power over you. That's a very powerful thing. It brings you the kind of honesty and intentions that you need. So I think that's a good thing. Don't you think? I do. Thanks for listening. Oh.